some technicians who are telling me that I am very quiet. Let me dial up the old settings. Bring myself up. I've never ever before been told that I've been too quiet in chat. So I hope that is a bit clearer, but many thanks to the indoor cat, Manic Land Lizzie, everybody who's working behind the scenes. We have an excellent tech crew looking after us, so thank you so much. And I think there is a plot summary at the top. Kat, do you want to launch on with the plot summary?
I would. I'll just explain that I thought about taking the extremely brief plot summary from Wikipedia, but then I decided that the first two episodes, Emissary Parts 1 and 2, they form one large film-length episode. It introduces a lot of characters, a lot of context for what's going to come, a lot of what's happening on the station and on Bajor below it. So I've written out quite a lengthy description of what happens in the episode, and my thinking is that as I go, I will probably wend off on little tangents. You are very welcome to bring in your knowledge, Tim, which is considerably greater than mine. You can also correct me where I've completely misunderstood what's happening, because flipping heck, this is set in a universe that's had a lot of stuff happen before it, and there is a lot going on. So I'm going to mispronounce people's names. I intended to say at the top, I have chronic fatigue syndrome, which means that occasionally my brain goes foggy. But if I just forget people's names because I'm new to this and I've seen the episode once, then I will try and fess up and just say, yeah, I can't remember who's Cardassian or Bajoran. Who knows what? No, I will do my best, is all I can promise. But, right, if I'm going on at too great a length, cut me short, but let's begin. Emissary Parts 1 and 2 were first broadcast on January the 4th, 1993. The episode opens with a Star Wars-style scroll of words, which I thought was very bold from another sci-fi property, explaining that on Stardate 43997, Jean-Luc Picard was kidnapped by the Borg and forced to lead an assault on Starfleet at Wolf 359. We see Commander Benjamin Sisko captaining his ship, the Saratoga, which is attacked, damaged, and ultimately destroyed by the Borg. Sisko, his wife, and his child are all aboard the ship. Sisko escapes. His crewmates carry his son to safety, but his wife dies on the Saratoga. Sisko looks back from the shuttle to see the Borg cube obliterating his ship. It's an extremely strong opening for an episode. It dives straight in, and it's very violent right from the beginning. It's clearly not for the young or the faint of heart. We learn that the Cardassians have taken everything of value from Deep Space Nine station on their way out. We learn that the station was previously under Cardassian control, but Bajor, the planet below it, has since gained independence. We meet Miles O'Brien, a familiar face from TNG. We meet Major Kira, a Bajoran who has fought for Bajoran independence since she was young, and she's annoyed that the Federation, who stayed out of the conflict between the Cardassians and Bajorans, have now taken control of the station above Bajor, which is supported by the Bajoran provisional government. We meet Odo, who's a shapeshifter, and Quark, who's played by Armin Shimerman, who I know as Principal Snyder from series 2 to 3 of Buffy. I've seen him get eaten by a giant snake, and here he is on board a space station. In the scene where we meet all those characters, Nog, who is Quark's nephew, gets arrested for attempted theft. The next scene, which we might dwell on a little bit, is one of my favourites. Sisko meets with Picard, and Picard is frosty when Sisko says that they previously met at Wolf 359. Sisko states his preference not to undertake the Deep Space Nine assignment due to its not working favourably. Alongside his duties as a now single, due to Picard as Locutus of Borg, father. And he asks that Picard pass that message to the Federation so that Sisko can step down when a replacement is appointed. Back on Deep Space Nine, Sisko asks Quark to stay aboard the station so as to keep his casino at the Promenade, which is checked for the Zocalo. I watched Babylon 5 before watching Star Trek. I'm going to try and be very fair. I'm going to try not to blame Star Trek for being very similar to Deep Space Nine. Sorry, to Babylon 5. You see, both got numbers, both sit on a space station, both have a Zocalo with shops in it. But they persuade Quark to stay so that he can keep his casino open. And they promise that Nog, his nephew, will be freed from prison in exchange for Quark staying in this admittedly politically shaky situation. The next part, Sisko meets with Kaya Opaka, the Bajoran spiritual leader. She tells Sisko that he is the Emissary, hence the episode title, and he's destined to discover the Prophet's home, the Celestial Temple. She shows him an orb, which is called the Tear of the Prophet, which upon opening turns into a kind of hourglass-shaped thing, and it transports Sisko into a memory of the day when he first asked out his then-future wife, Jennifer, on a beach. After this, back on the station, Sisko says that the Cardassians probably have the 8 other similar orbs in their labs, and part of his mission is going to be to recover those orbs. I assume that's going to be important in upcoming episodes. We meet Jadzia Dax and Julian Bashir. Julian Bashir is trying to hit on Jadzia Dax. She actually seems kind of delighted. Sisko makes clear that while Dax claims to be 28 years old, she's closer to 328. She's a trill, a joined species which moves from one host body to another. When Miles O'Brien leaves the Enterprise in the next scene, Picard is the one to operate the transporter, which is very sweet and makes Picard look a little more sympathetic than in the previous scene. Gul Dukat, the Cardassian ex-prefect of Bajor, meets with Sisko. Gul Dukat is not a good guy. He makes it very clear that he was not happy about having to leave his post. Dukat asks Sisko about the orbs and suggests that he and the Federation share resources on the matter. Sisko lies and says he's never heard of the orbs and doesn't know what he's talking about. Good for Sisko. Dax tells Sisko about the Denorios Belt, where at least 5 of the orbs were found and where a previous Kai, religious leader, had a vision of the heavens opening. This place is a possible location for the Celestial Temple. Sisko says that they will need to explore it without the knowledge of the Cardassians. Odo, the shapeshifter, temporarily disables the Cardassian warship to enable Sisko and Dax to leave the station on a runabout, which is the Deep Space Nine equivalent of the blue midget on board the Red Dwarf. Sci-fi I have watched. So they can do that unnoticed by the Cardassians. Now here's where it gets interesting. If you've hung on this far, this is the good bit. The runabout gets sucked into a wormhole and out the other side, and they comment that this might be the first stable wormhole known to exist in the Star Trek universe. The others collapse as they discover them. Despite there being no readings of an M-class planet, that's an Earth atmosphere planet, where they've exited from the wormhole, the runabout suddenly lands on land, and Sisko and Dax walk outside. Sisko, when he walks around, sees a dark, bleak landscape with lightning strikes and thunder, while Dax looks around and sees a beautiful garden in summer. Another orb appears. Sisko introduces himself to the orb. Both carriages are thrown backwards. Dax sees the landscape changing to reflect the dark, sinister landscape that Sisko can see, and Dax then disappears. Sisko is left alone in a bright, white space. The orb moves out of the wormhole, and it is carrying Sisko with it. O'Brien manages to transport Dax out of the wormhole back onto the station. Now, this is Emissary Part 2. Sisko senses a presence. We see flashes of his memories, his wife on the beach, his son catching a baseball, Locutus of Borg attacking them, Sisko kissing his wife, his son as a newborn. The unknown aliens that are present in the orb speak to him through the memory of his wife on the beach. She identifies him as a corporeal, physical entity, and Sisko and the aliens start a conversation. And the aliens speak through the people in Sisko's memories. So Sisko says it's going to take time for them to understand one another, and the alien asks, "What is this time?" Yeah, what is this Earth thing you call time? Kira, back on the station, Kira wants to claim the wormhole for Bajor with the help of Starfleet. We learn that Odo doesn't know who or where the rest of his species are. He believes that the answers might lie on the other side of this wormhole. The unnamed orb aliens are distrustful of Sisko. Some of them claim that he will destroy them, and they want to kill him before he gets the chance. He replies, "My species respects life above all else." It becomes clear that they don't understand linear time, so he starts explaining how we as humans experience the present, which becomes the past, and how we cannot experience our future until it becomes the present. In the next scene, what the heck is Bashir doing on a shuttle that's going to see what the Cardassians are up to? Tim, he's a medical doctor. Why is he even there? He's got no business on an ambassadorial mission. All he does is look cute and do medical shit.
Welcome to Bashir. That's his job. Please go
Hi,
on.
Bashir. Being there looking attractive and flirting with apparently everyone. Anyway, it turns out that Gul Dukat is heading into the wormhole despite Kira and Odo telling him that there are hostile aliens inside it. He's just like, no, I'm sure we'll be fine. We're Cardassians, we can take it. Sisko explains to the aliens about linear existence, that each day affects the next. We see a scene of him and his future wife, Jennifer, before they've been engaged, agreeing that they both want to have children. And suddenly Sisko is back in the memory of his wife's death aboard his ship, the Saratoga. He says to the aliens, it is difficult to be here, more difficult than the other memory. I don't want to be here. So the aliens ask him, so why do you exist here? And they repeat, you exist here. The sequence of memories through which the aliens communicate with Sisko is thematically linked. He sees his wife happy, he then sees her dying, he then sees his son, he hears some children playing, he sees a baseball game. He has to explain to the aliens the idea of competition for fun, because they see the baseball game and they see aggression and people being in opposition to each other. Sisko then explains that every time a ball is thrown, the number of possibilities for what might happen next is huge, and it's exciting. That's the point of it. It's linear. We cannot know what will happen next. He's suddenly back aboard the Saratoga where his wife is dying. The aliens ask him, if this is true, why do you exist here? Meantime, the wormhole has collapsed with Gul Dukat inside it, and the other Cardassians believe that the Bajorans have captured or killed him. Oh no! They demand the unconditional surrender of the Deep Space Nine station within an hour, or they will open fire. Meanwhile, Sisko is still trapped inside an orb with aliens that don't know how time works. The aliens explain that they are not controlling the memories Sisko is experiencing. One of them says, we do not bring you here. You bring us here. His location inside his memories follows where his mind is taking him, and it keeps bringing him back to the Saratoga, where his wife is still dying. He asks the aliens to give him the power to take him somewhere else, anywhere else, and they reply, we cannot give you what you deny yourself. And Sisko realizes and says, I never left the ship. The alien responds, you exist here. And he repeats, sobbing, I exist here. It is not linear. And at this point, while I was watching, I started sobbing uncontrollably and I stopped writing down what was happening. So the rest of it is from memory. Sisko awakes back aboard his shuttle, which soon tows Gul Dukat's vessel out of the now reopened wormhole. Dukat is returned to the Cardassians. Kira and Bashir heave a sigh of relief. The station and Bajor are safe for now. Sisko then meets with Picard aboard the Enterprise for a second time. And Sisko says that he's changed his mind. He wishes to remain as commander of Deep Space Nine. Picard is skeptical, given that Sisko didn't want the job last time he saw him, but Sisko insists. End episode.
Well,
Sorry, that was an extremely long time of me talking. We'll try not to do that again.
if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to jump in with that intro with the Battle of Wolf 359,
Yes.
which is very interesting, and it's a really dramatic place to start. And just as a clarification, Sisko was a first officer, not a captain of a ship there.
Oh, I apologise.
No, easily done. He was wearing the red, but he was like the Riker on that ship.
Oh, okay. Got you.
But I think Wolf 359, it was an attempt by the TNG producers. Obviously, Kat, you've just come straight out of a TNG watch, so you'll know that things like that were not very usual. That kind of sci-fi action thriller, big spaceship collision. So I think it was very dramatic for TNG watchers, but also it was very dramatic in terms of showing us a great deal of Starfleet Federation death, you know.
Absolutely. We don't, yeah, you're right. We don't often see permanent injury or death for our heroes. They usually get out of everything unscathed. Someone turns up to save them. We've certainly never seen a huge number of people die at the hands of a Starfleet officer. And Jean-Luc Picard is Locutus of Borg. He's on the screen commanding the Borg to destroy the Federation ships.
Friends,
it's very dark.
Colleagues. It is horrendous. And as well as it being, you know, awful for the people involved, it's also, they try and expand on this a bit in the wider Star Trek universe, but it's actually quite a traumatic event in universe history. 11,000 souls and 39 starships lost at Wolf 359. The biggest defeat Starfleet has suffered since probably the Romulan Wars of a couple of hundred years prior. And it leaves a mark. And I think that straight out the door, we realise that Sisko is a man dealing with trauma. He
Absolutely.
has survivor guilt. He has loss of a wife, loss of a ship, friends, colleagues. All of it done by, yes, this man, Jean-Luc Picard, a hero of Starfleet, a hero of the Federation, suddenly transformed into something terrifying, something traitorous. I mean,
It's interesting how the viewer has to be carried from one show to another. But in terms of the Next Generation, Picard remains, he's the captain in terms of what happened to him as the accused of Borg. He was a victim. He was tortured. He was physically adjusted. He was altered. He had surgical alterations made to him by the Borg. And we see his perspective. We see him return to his crew and how frail he was for a while after that. At the point at which we meet him here, he hasn't yet dealt with the trauma of it. There is a moment when Sisko says, "We have met before at Wolf 359," and Picard sneers. He doesn't say how difficult that was for him. He doesn't say that was not my fault. He doesn't argue or defend himself. He sneers slightly at Sisko, turns away, and starts talking about the station. He's not ready to go there. And he's villainous, frankly. He's not a sympathetic character in that moment. And I think while I did...
I was just going to say, I imagine that must have been quite strange for you, having, you saw that episode, and I think they dealt with it in the following episode, back in TNG, season 4, whenever it was. And then they kind of moved on, is the Next Generation way. So I imagine seeing Picard as almost adversarial must have been kind of strange for you.
It absolutely wasn't what I expected, because as you say, I think there are many moments in TNG when Picard is shown as being a slightly cold and calculating leader. He makes decisions that have to be made, but it's always shown from his perspective, and he's always understood by the audience in those moments. It's made clear that he's struggling with things. Whereas here, what I'd expected was the torch being passed in a friendly way. Oh yes, I'm over here on the Enterprise still. This is the new station. I give you my commendation as the new commander. No, none of that. It's, we don't like one another. You clearly don't want this job. Why are you here?
And
I'd not expected that. It's a very brave way of trying to bring an audience from one show into another.
I would 100% agree, and I love it for that. I love that it immediately says, this is not the Next Generation, this is a different show. We're going in a different direction. We're going to confront hard issues. We can't run away from our problems or our trauma. We have to face them head on. And in that scene, we have a contrast between Sisko, who has not moved on from his grief and trauma and is angry, versus Picard, who has not moved on from his grief and trauma and is hiding behind his job. He buries himself in his work. He will not acknowledge what happened at Wolf 359.
There's as just talking, there's something of the Enterprise. They dash from one part of space to another. They go from one adventure to another. There's more or less a hard reset at the end of every episode. 100%. They can fly away from whatever has just happened to them and move on to the next thing. Deep Space Nine is a space station and everyone is damn well stuck on it. Pretty much. They can leave on the shuttles, they can go on little missions, but they are staying there. And that first episode is something... Exactly, and they have to sit with what is happening in the same way that Sisko has to come back to that memory again and again until he's resolved it. They can't get away from the Cardassians. They've got to sit there and try and resolve it diplomatically.
They have to fix Bajor somehow. They have to repair the station. They have to put together a lot of broken pieces, which is not something the Next Generation ever really touched on. They
can't just give them a set of grey boxes that contain the technology they need and then bugger off to the next part of space. No, they've got to stay and deal with it. Which,
I absolutely love it. And it does set the tone for the show. I am already going slightly off topic because I did want to point out that there is a fan account on Twitter, or X, or whatever we're calling it today, but it's called the Wolf 359 Project, and they have just published a fan-written free PDF available for download called We Have Encountered the Borg, which is basically a collection of interviews with characters in universe. It's all in universe. It's seen as a kind of oral history of the Battle of Wolf 359. And it's wonderful. It's so detailed and it's quite emotional as well. It talks to a lot of people and it's very free and open about dealing with the trauma of Wolf 359. And it's a magic book. It's available for free. So please do look up the Wolf 359 Project on Twitter and check out this book. And I think it's great because it does give voice to something that I don't think the Next Generation had ever done in the way you describe, where people are like, these problems exist and we can't get away from them. It's going to take years to work through this. This is going to take professional mental health management, which thankfully Kat is something of an expert in, so she can speak to that with far more authority than me. But yeah, counselling, rather than just having the counsellor as some kind of telepath advisor on the bridge. No, we mean real helping people through trauma. And DS9 will do its best to take that on. But
I am really interested to see how. Can we go a little bit further into? Yeah. I know we've kind of moved away from the chronological in the episode, but just while we're on the topic of trauma and how it's described in the episode, I was just so impressed by how well the episode deals with Sisko's trauma and how we're introduced to it through his memories at the same time as the aliens are learning about it. So there's a nice little neatness of the aliens learning about him for the first time. And as the aliens learn about how linear time works, he learns that his experience is not as linear as he thought. He comes to an understanding that he is the one bringing himself back. And it's just incredibly powerful and very sympathetic. It's a really nice understanding. For all that it's in a military context, and I think a lot of media up to that point dealt with PTSD in terms of remembering bombs going off, in terms of the world wars and Vietnam and other conflicts in which America was involved. I think this does a good job of showing us a very rounded character who's a parent. Before anything else, he considers leaving Starfleet to tend to his son. And it shows a very, for all that it's saying space, it's a very realistic depiction of the nature of trauma, that our minds take us back in flashbacks or intrusive thoughts or frequent reminders of events which were painful and confusing. And it's our mind's attempt to resolve them in terms of neurology. A traumatic memory hasn't been resolved into long-term memory yet. A trauma memory is stored in short-term memory as a current and active event, as though it happened very recently, and sometimes as though it is happening now. And it represents the same threat and danger as when the event first occurred. And all those feelings are still present. Our mind cannot understand that when those feelings are there, the event has stopped happening. The mind thinks it's still happening to us. And in Sisko's case, it looks as though just recognizing and accepting that this is happening in his own mind, that a part of him is choosing to continue to go back there instead of moving forward without his wife. The recognition of that is enough for him to feel his grief fully and to begin to heal from it. And that's often the case in grief, that a sudden recontextualization of what is happening can help a person start to readjust to their life without the person who's died. But we were talking about how you stay with it. With traumatic memories, it can take a lot of slow and patient work of learning how to feel safe again, training the mind to recognize that the world which is around us can be a safe place for us to be in, before our mind stops pulling us back to the dangerous past where it thinks we need to focus, because that's where the interesting and terrible and thing we need to be aware of. That's where the danger lies. And yeah, just like the experience of life, healing from trauma isn't linear. We move forwards and backwards in our journey towards feeling safer. And I'm really interested to see how the series deals with that, whether that's, he's over his wife's death now, he's fine actually, it's going to be fine, or whether whether he will keep going back to that. I was talking for a long time. But in The Next Generation, Jean-Luc Picard's experience of his trauma after the Borg, he goes back home to his family and he suddenly breaks down when telling his brother what has happened to him. And it's the first time he's fully described to someone what it was like and how powerless he felt. And he starts to heal from that point on. I think there's someone in the writing team who has a very solid understanding of how trauma can impact a person. I really like that, and I find it very moving.
Well, you will love DS9 then. So I'm reminded by the tech team to say welcome to the stream, people who are joining us lately. I am Tim, this
Hello.
is Kat, and we are talking about DS9, Season 1, Episode 1, Emissary. And obviously,
welcome to Star Trauma.
Star Trauma, I love that. Let's get that on t-shirts immediately. That is brilliant. And in the chat, Manic Landizzi is correctly pointing out that actually DS9 does that a lot. Vulnerability is something that affects all of the characters, and you start to see that come out. They are all dealing with something that happened in their past, and some of them wear it on their sleeve, like Major Kira. It's obviously a very embittered and hardened freedom fighter. And, Bashir is a very new, naive, confident, but inexperienced officer. So we start to see these characters come in as one form, and, given time, we will see them change and become something new. And there is, a great deal of acknowledging that journey, which I think makes DS9 stand out, definitely, as one of the best stories. So, shall we push ourselves on now? I mean, we could talk about Sisko's trauma and that. And I tell you what, I've seen this episode 100 times, and Ben Sisko, Avery Brooks, the actor's trauma when he is confronted with Jessica's death, it still actually hits me. I feel that man is really enunciating pain and loss, and it really does knock me for six. I think it's wonderful. I think you also really took that scene seriously.
I actually watched the episode twice, and I just burst into tears both times when he says, "I exist here. It is not linear." It's just it's wonderful how well they built up to that moment and how he carries it. And within that moment as well, I really like how I think we were going to have a prime directive part of the show, how we look at how we're looking back at it from our position, and we cannot affect how it was at the time. We can only observe it from our distance. But I was impressed by some of the memories in which he expresses his blackness as a character. He talks about his father's aubergine stew. He, at one point, makes a noise which I won't try to replicate. It goes, "ow," in that way that I think, for me, it's highly redolent of Black American culture in the 80s and 90s. It's a sound that Michael Jackson popularized in a lot of his songs. It's a sound that Danny John Jules' cat in Red Dwarf makes frequently. And it just feels throughout his depiction of the character, it doesn't feel like a black actor squeezed into a role that was written for just anyone to sit in. It feels like he's written as a black character, which a couple of friends have told me is borne out throughout the show, looking back into Sisko's past and background and his family. And I was very impressed by that, because it could have been I think it's quite common to write every character as a white man and then just squeeze someone, a woman, a black man, someone else into the role. But it doesn't feel like that's been done here.
Yeah. You would think there is a model starship captain, and I think unfortunately TNG, has borne that out a bit. You expect to see an older white man in the centre chair.
Absolutely.
And they tried sometimes to get away from it, and there have been, some other characters. I mean, most famously, the Enterprise C, preceding Picard, was captained by a woman, Captain Rachel Garrett. So that was a nice recognition that, anybody can sit in the centre chair. It doesn't have to be an old white man. Here's a woman. And in turn, we will have a black man in the centre chair, one of the most important seats in the Federation. And again, with our prime directive, it's the 21st century here. We absolutely accept that that's realistic. In the 90s, not so much. And there are later episodes which do kind of explore how it might be seen from outside the progressive utopian Federation, that actually having a black man in charge is unusual by those standards. But we will save that special discovery for a later episode. I would now like you to press on to what you have for your next scene.
Next scene. We've got too many scenes to cover every single one of them. So just in terms of what really stood out to me, Jadzia Dax. Now, I think you told me when we were discussing her that the Trill were inspired by the Time Lords, the idea of characters that could be played by multiple actors over the course of their lifetime in the show.
That's absolutely right.
And when we meet Jadzia Dax, she is in a relatively young, apparently around 28-year-old female body, and we see one scene in which, I'm not sure which name to refer to her by, Dax's Trill self is transferred from her old body, who was an old man, Curzon, into
the symbiont.
Jadzia.
That's the worm in the belly is called the symbiont.
Yeah, so the symbiont is kind of the centre of the self of the Trill, which moves into a host body. And in discussing this with Sisko, it's clear that Dax has been as comfortable living in a male body as in a female body. There hasn't been any dysphoria, any problem with moving from one to another. It's normal for a trill to do so. And I liked that. I liked that it was named and not really explored. It was just kind of mentioned there and left hanging. But I liked the possibility of some of the implications that might have and the openness that the show has to that.
There is a lot to come from Dax's unique biology. And again, it'll be an interesting one to review in our Prime Directives, how the show treats, gender interchangeability with the trill, because they don't get hung up on it, really. It is just seen that, Jadzia is a woman, Curzon, the predecessor, was a man. There have been others prior that we shall encounter. There's that's it, though. They do tend to move between the two polars, so not as progressive as we might hope. But
every Star Trek species does seem to have male and female, or one or the other, or neutral. There's very rarely anything beyond that. It's quite nice that there are some that have neutral gender, but relatively few.
This is right. And Manic Landizzi, I can see in the chat, is dropping a few very famous lines that are going to come up. I'm not going to spoil them, but there's some brilliant ones that I know.
I'm not following the chat, incidentally. Tim is very kindly keeping an eye on it, so I am.
That's right.
I am kept away from these spoilers.
This is it. We do want to obviously protect Cat from spoilers because they've never seen it before. So we want to preserve your fresh take on it. And it's going to be fantastic. Kat Bodwa has just dropped in to say that the concept was mind-blowing. And it was, yeah. And I loved, like you noticed, Kat, that it was so... it was almost taken as an amusing anecdote. Oh, and by the way, Jadzia used to be a man, now a woman. Anyway, on with the show. And that is incredible. You can imagine, in 1993, the concept was astounding. But
yeah, absolutely. And it's one of many things that they cram into this first episode that's got so damn much in it.
That's why I think we're...
The boldness of squeezing that in there just as an aside. It's incredible.
We're about 20 minutes in, but we've been talking for about 40. So at this rate, we should probably press on, I feel. So I noticed as well that Ben and Jake have a great relationship. Again, it must have been amazing for 90s television. A black man is here for his son. He loves his son. And he will not be parted, and he will do a lot for his son, including, as you pointed out, he will give up his career in Starfleet. But I love their relationship, and it's constantly explored as a really positive one of a career man whose demands, he doesn't have a normal working day. He can't just leave the office and go and spend time with his son. Anything could happen. So it's hard for Ben and Jake to have a normal family. But we'll cover that.
And again, it's a nice move away from Picard, who is a career officer who doesn't have any children and doesn't have a binding tie to any single person.
Yeah. 100%. It is.
Again, it's more settled. We are in a situation which we have to remain in and cope with.
Yes, they absolutely do explore it, which is wonderful. I did want to immediately get your impression about Major Kira, who, when we see her for the first time, is in Ben Sisko's office, absolutely haranguing a member of her government and telling them that they're a fool. I love it. It is so incredibly definitive in about 30 seconds of this character. Tell me what you thought of Major Kira, our Bajoran liaison.
I'm afraid that coming fresh out of The Next Generation, my first impression of Major Kira was this was meant to be Ro Laren, wasn't it?
It was 100%.
Ro Laren was the Bajoran character from The Next Generation,
and they wanted her. She
was a woman. She was a Bajoran freedom fighter.
Yeah.
She'd entered the Federation. I think the entry of the Federation into Deep Space Nine is Major Kira's introduction to the Federation. I don't think she was a Starfleet officer prior to then.
She's still not. Technically, Major Kira works for the Bajoran government. She is not a Starfleet officer. So That's
quite nice then, having someone who is still outside the establishment.
I think that is a great thing as well about DS9. TNG had always been about the crew. We're Federation officers. All of us, we work together. DS9, you've got Major Kira, Constable Odo, Quark, and later characters who are not part of Starfleet, who are there to go, your rules are insane, you won't let us do anything. It's great. It is a source of conflict within the main cast, which had always been something that Gene Roddenberry had suggested we avoid. He had always advised the writers to not show conflict between the cast because we were meant to portray a utopian society where there was no conflict between us and we all got along and we all worked for the greater good.
So problems sit outside and we deal with them together.
Which is wonderful, if I think a little two-dimensional, a little bit unreasonable.
And very much of its time. There's a bit of, as you were talking, I was just thinking that, yeah, the original series and The Next Generation are a little bit Brooklyn Nine-Nine in space. We are the good guys, we deal with the bad guys who are out there, and we are good, and we got some internal problems, but ultimately we're good, and we fight for right, and we're intergalactic cops. Whereas Deep Space Nine, it sounds like they're going to be far more willing to explore how the Federation has come in, and Kira, in one of her early scenes, isn't pleased that the Federation have suddenly arrived. Now that the conflict has ended,
and
the Federation is suddenly there to look after this space station. They didn't get involved. They didn't help Bajor up to now.
No.
So the idea of the Federation as an always positive force in the universe is really challenged by her and by her continued presence and her anger. I love that she's so angry. She's not grateful that the Federation have turned up to help. There's a wonderful scene where Bashir says that he makes a throwaway comment about what it's like to be out here in the wilderness, and she says, "Oh yes, you'll find the natives." What is it she said exactly? I wrote it down because I was so impressed by it.
It is a brilliant line. Yeah.
Oh yeah, he can do his part by bringing medicine to the natives. He'll find them a friendly, simple folk. She calls out Bashir for his white saviorism immediately, and I might be lacking in my knowledge, but I don't think I've seen another 90s show that does that so quickly and so abruptly. She's not going to let him get away with that shit.
I couldn't speak to any other shows, but you have put your finger right on one of the core themes of DS9, which is, let's have another look at the Federation.
I have, though, just reserved to white saviorism in terms of Bashir, which is absolutely not. He isn't a white man.
No, 100%.
But in terms of an establishment and a large power and an authoritative force coming in and offering help.
Exactly. No, you're absolutely right. And there's nothing wrong with pointing that out. I think that is exactly how the character was intended. That he is an Indian-British man, the actor, is not part of it. It is that Bashir represents... I think he's almost there as the two-dimensional view of the Federation we've had of the Next Generation, of only ever being the good guys. When in reality, there are people who are not part of the Federation or part of the Cardassians, individuals. And you know what? They've just been occupied by the Cardassian Union for decades. Another power block, an even bigger power block, then moves in to be like, oh, let us help. And you can understand Kira's suspicion, mistrust, immediate just hostility towards another great power moving in to assert itself over Bajor, which clearly only ever wants freedom and independence, values that the Federation is meant to enshrine. Now, this is again a very long-running storyline. We will touch on this in other episodes where we try and examine what it's like to be somebody who's not in the Federation, and then how do they approach you? How do they encourage you to join their organisation, and what does that mean? What do you give up in joining the Federation? It's interesting.
Because I must admit, I'm really interested by... The Prime Directive is famously broken in nearly every episode of the original series, extremely frequently in The Next Generation. That line between where do we step in to help a clearly struggling people and where do we step back and let nature take its course? How far does non-involvement go? Why didn't they come in and help Bajor earlier? Why didn't they fight the Cardassians, who are clearly the aggressor? It's an interesting line that the Federation treads. And I quite like the idea that they're being posed as not being the good guys in this.
100%. So Manik Landisi in the chat just pointed out this has come right after the collapse of the Soviet Union, who obviously absorbed a lot of Eastern European nations, often against their will. So there is, it's not brilliantly described, but when Bashir says, "Oh, the Federation's only here to help," Kira says, "Yeah, that's what the Cardassians said." They did. They turned up diplomatically and said, "We are here to help." The Bajorans then signed an agreement with them and became a client state of the Cardassians, at which point the Prime Directive kicked in. The Federation could not interfere in what was seen as an internal Cardassian matter. Even though there were a lot of kind of there was some controversial intelligence operations where people were smuggling arms to the Bajorans from inside the Federation, and there was the demilitarized zone, and the constant risk of conflict between the Federation and the Cardassians. They were worried that all-out war would happen, so unfortunately the Bajorans were very much left alone. And you start to think, well, how are these vaunted Federation ideals about fighting for freedom? Yes, but not if it drags us into a massive, costly interstellar war. You can sort of understand that the Federation don't want to do that. It's hard. Suddenly, the black and white of Picard's Enterprise is now the greys of Sisko's DS9, where there isn't often a great choice. You just have to go with perhaps the least worst. It's hard. It's so hard, and that is something we'll touch on.
And we sit there and stay with that situation. We don't go, well, the Golden Cat's returned Picard to the Federation again. We're safe. We can get away now. No, they're here. They're going to keep coming back. I think there's one point at which Golden Cat says that his men are going to enjoy walking on the promenade and enjoying the shops and the casinos there. There's a scene where some of his men win a large amount of currency.
Yes.
Suddenly there's currency in universe. We've never had credits, merits, dollars, pounds, anything. We are a post-currency universe, and suddenly we've got, was it Latinum?
Gold-pressed Latinum, yes.
These huge bars of, effectively they're little gold bars, platinum gold bars, which you can win at Quark's Casino. And yeah, suddenly money is important again, and it just feels like in a very different world from being aboard the Enterprise.
100% it is. So DS9 is on the edge of the Federation. It is the front line. There is Bajor, which is independent, and then just beyond Bajor is the front lines of the Cardassian Union. So they are really on the very edge of everything that Picard would normally explore. And that's why, we get people turning up who aren't Federation citizens, who use money, who want to gamble, and just... It's a much
messier universe suddenly.
Yes. Oh, messy is such a good word for it. I think we're gonna enjoy that a great deal. Here we are again. So the next thing I have down is Quark basically going to Odo's police office and trying to negotiate the release of his nephew from custody. And obviously, yes, you know Armin Shimmerman as Principal Snyder from Buffy, but I knew him from this first, so for me it was the other way around. Of course.
I think they did, this did come before Buffy, but I happened to see Buffy before I saw any Star Trek.
There we go. No, that's fair enough. But I love this scene because it sets up exactly these personalities of Quark, who I believe Odo describes as having all the character references of a politician. And you suddenly think, oh, what? That's a really cynical thing to hear. And it establishes these personalities of Quark as this kind of... He's clearly a bit of a wide boy in space. And Odo is clearly this very straight-laced law above all else. And I really want to get your take on that scene, because I love it.
I think for me, the interesting thing coming out of The Next Generation was that we've got a Ferengi who has a personality. He's going to be sticking around. He doesn't just come in, gnash his sharp teeth at the characters, say that none of the women should be wearing clothes, and then bugger off again. He's going to stick around and get some character depth. He's got a nephew. He's got ties. I think that for all that, he runs a casino. He generally cheats his patrons. It's made clear at the end of the episode he's not allowed to do that to everyone anymore.
Yes.
He'll doubtless do it to some people. But I think in The Next Generation there's one Ferengi character who's respectable. There's a scientist who is murdered partway through the episode.
Yes, I know what you mean, yes. Mm-hmm.
But prior to that, the Ferengi are just a stand-in for... I worry about who they're meant to be a stand-in for. They're a race of cheats and liars who you can't trust, who will lure you in by sending out a distress signal and then attack your ship. So I'm really hoping we'll get a little bit more depth on the Ferengi in this series, that we'll get some proper character development, some realization that they are people. Yes, they have a culture, which is very different from the Federation's idea of what's right.
100%.
But yeah, it's going to be different.
They do. I don't think it's any spoiler to say that Ferengi do turn up regularly. They're very close galactic neighbours in universe. They're not very far away. And they do get several storylines. They are played more for laughs, it must be said. There are several episodes that are clearly stand-up comedies episodes. But there are also opportunities to, expand on this culture. So, we learn a lot more about the Ferengi. And they have a whole arc of development, their whole culture. but that is all to come, and I don't want to spoil any of it.
Because again, without this is one place where DS9 I think will outshine Babylon 5. It's always a controversial thing to compare the two. I'm aware of that, but in Babylon 5, generally speaking, each species is treated with absolute respect, apart from the Pakmara, I think it is, who are just constantly made fun of, and they dine on rotting flesh, and they're only ever mentioned as the butt of jokes, and no one wants to communicate with them. And at least here we've got the species that have previously been the race of people who have previously been considerably unpleasant, and it sounds as if they're still going to be used comedically, but there's going to be some recognition that they're people.
Yeah, 100%. They do get a development, and they get far more three-dimensional, and it is wonderfully liberating. I'm skipping through my notes now because we've touched on Dax and Bashir and Kira putting him in his place. What a brilliant scene. Yes, Gul Dukat. Now, I don't think it's a spoiler to say that Gul Dukat is going to become a bit of a regular adversary. He was the former commander of this station. He was also the former overseer of Bajor when it was occupied. And he is also, a gloatingly, wonderfully overstated, cod theatrical, hated character. So, any initial impressions?
He's got a very strong presence on screen. He steps at, I think the first scene where he appears in this episode, he goes and sits at his old desk and tells Sisko, "You can hardly blame me. It was mine yesterday."
I love that scene, and you get the feeling, oh wow, this guy's actually got a sense of humour, but in the kind of hand rubbing,
a very sinister way, yes,
Luthor style. Yeah, I think he's a very strong villain. It will be interesting to see how your impression of him changes. But right now, yeah, he is very much a two-dimensional, opportunistic Cardassian officer, smarting from defeat, smarting from being thrown off Bajor, determined to turn it around. Because obviously, as prefect of Bajor, he was seen as the man who lost this territory. So that's why he's so willing to immediately butt heads with Sisko. So.
Oh, and hence when the wormhole opens up, he immediately dives into it, because if there is something to be got out of the situation, he needs to recover it. He needs to get something for himself and for the Cardassians.
100%. That is exactly how it is. But before he does that, obviously, what I thought was really interesting was, I mentioned earlier about how Odo is the police officer. He's the station chief of security, not a Starfleet officer. But when they proposed to him, would you mind turning into a bag, sneaking onto the Cardassian warship and sabotaging it for us? He is well up for it. I mean, I don't know how he squares that. That doesn't seem like a legal or even that's a diplomatic incident right there. But Odo, he's in. I couldn't believe it.
He's got a sense of adventure, maybe.
100%, I think he does.
And he's certainly got unique skills. I did enjoy the scenes where I think he goes through an air grate at one point.
Yes.
It just turns into a liquid and seeps through. It's very Terminator 2.
100%. And I think, again, for early 90s, it was quite a success in terms of the technology. I think it looks
It really is.
Dated, but I think it still looks pretty good.
It stands up, though. I don't think there's anything that I looked at and thought, oh, it's people wearing rubber, people with rubber stuck to their heads and terrible CGI. It stands up, and it was a very bold thing to suggest, because they could just have gone, we can't do a shapeshifter. It's just tech isn't up to it. But no, they did it, and it works. I'm excited to watch more of what he's going to do.
Odo, as the main character, gets a wonderful storyline. But again, no spoilers, all that to come. I loved Prophet Space. I loved being in the wormhole. I thought it was the weirdest thing I think Star Trek's ever done. Because none of it made sense. You yourself were trying to work out why they couldn't communicate properly with Sisko. And then, as you say, they discover that they're non-linear. They don't understand cause and effect.
Yeah, and I think the thing that stood out for me in terms of the character of Sisko, he is so patient. He goes from flying into a wormhole, flying out the other side, landing on a planet that he doesn't know what it is. His companion doesn't see the same planet around him. Suddenly he's in a bright white space. Someone's talking to him through the body of his dead wife. And he's very patient. He's such a diplomatic hero. My God. I think
I've written that exact thing. I said Sisko's an excellent ambassador. It's a massive job finding common ground with non-linear, non-corporeal beings, and he does it so well.
And he has to do it while being constantly confronted with highly emotional memories. They're not
Provocative.
taking him to random places. As far as he's concerned, they are carrying him to some of the worst memories that he holds. And he continues to talk to them and not be aggressive towards them. And he keeps his cool. And there's a bit of me feeling that I need to go and see what Avery Brooks made of it, just because there's a long-running stereotype that black people in the US, men and women, are treated as though they are excessively aggressive if they show any emotion. Here is a man who's in a position where he has to remain diplomatic. He's clearly experiencing a high level of emotion, and he has to remain calm in order to remain safe and to keep his Federation safe. And that was, impressive and difficult to watch.
I thought so as well. I did think, I was astonished at how brave they were putting that kind of concept into the very first show. The very first time we see this character is them absolutely confronted with the most challenging situation ever. For me, I liked that Sisko did keep his cool, because it reminded us that, above all else, he is a Federation officer. He is Starfleet, which means I'm going to confront strange stuff, and I'm just going to have to be the best version of myself, because I am an ambassador for my people, for the Federation. So although we've said that the Federation perhaps isn't all roses, the concepts it embodies are worthy.
And the people that it recruits to it as well, because that's, if you threw Picard into that situation at that point in time, he'd have been defensive as all hell. He'd never have got to, oh yes, actually, time is not linear and I'm experiencing these traumatic memories. I should come to terms with this.
He would expect it was Q, and he would immediately be like, right, I'm not having this nonsense. Not again, Q. Not again.
Don't dangle Q in front of me. I can talk about Q forever.
I've already, for everyone, I don't think it's a spoiler to warn Kat that Q only turns up once in DS9.
I know. And I've very gamely not just skipped ahead to watch the Q episode. I'm going to wait my turn.
It is a great episode, though, but you will see why Q does not make a return to DS9, but we'll say no more about it.
Yes, in terms of the philosophy and the... Sorry, I interrupted you then.
No, that's fine. Please, if you've more to say on this one, I'd love to hear it.
Just, in terms of what you were saying about how bold it was to have that series of memories, that series of very emotive sequences, it really felt like a statement of intent on the part of the writers that at the end of The Next Generation, I'm going to mention Q again. Q says to Picard that his further journeys are not going to be about exploring exterior space. It's going to be about exploring the inner workings of reality, about the experience of existing. And the first episode of this series just dives straight into that. What is it to be human? What is it to live in linear time? What is it to recognize that your experience is not linear, that you are constantly beholden to your past and you will keep revisiting it? What the hell?
Right?
It's a challenge to the character, and it's a challenge to the viewer. I wonder how many people walked away from it just going, what the absolute hell was that? I'm not watching this frickin' LSD bullshit.
I think possibly it did. Like all Star Trek shows do have that challenge of establishing themselves and being like, okay, we are in the same universe, but we want to bring something new to this universe. We want to tell our stories differently. And I can imagine a lot of people did get turned off the same way a lot of people didn't like TNG because it wasn't Kirk anymore. You know, so I think there is always going to be that challenge, but I think if you stick with it, and I remember it immediately sparking an interest in me when I first saw it in the early 90s, it rewards you. It's like, okay, you like things that are a bit subversive, that challenge what we think we know about this universe. Let's give you that in spades. So I am so excited about that. But yes, I don't want us to run out of time to talk about everything, so I am going to keep pushing us along. I love that Kira is immediately stepping into control on the station. With Sisko gone, she's like, okay, I've got all these Starfleet people I don't know. This is my home. I know where I am. I'm going to start telling you what's going on, which involves the realities of the wormhole, the political realities. She immediately recognises the value of it, the worth of it.
She does. She says that the Cardassians are going to claim it before Ducat's seen it.
100%, and that would be devastating. The universe's first stable wormhole to an unexplored quadrant. You can tell how important that will be to everyone.
And for it to sit right outside Bajor and for the Cardassians to claim that as a line of passage. Yeah, horrific.
Yeah, it would be the worst. So she's grasped the political realities immediately. This is a smart woman and an assertive woman. She's like, right, we've got to make a play for it. And, O'Brien's explanations that this station is falling apart. We've nothing on it to defend against. And she's like, it doesn't matter. We've got to stake our claim. And I don't like you people, but you are the best bet. If we can stake a claim that's backed by the Federation, the Cardassians won't push us. There's a bit of political reality there that I don't think comes into Star Trek. Normally it's like, oh, hello, cloud person from Rigel 9. Let me tell you about this human thing called love. And it's like, DS9's like political realities. You're on the front lines of explored space. There's no harmony, love and justice out here. There's just the reality of this station doesn't work and we need power. We need help. And I love it. I love that Kira just takes charge. And
having done that within a few minutes of her saying we cannot let the Cardassians take this wormhole, Gul Dukat has gone into it, the wormhole is closed, and the Cardassians have said you've got about an hour to sort this out. If he's not back here, we're going to
first day on the job
fire with everything we've got. And she has to cope with that, and she deals with it, and she keeps talking to the Cardassians. She gets, I think it's O'Brien and Odo who sort out putting up, and they put up some kind of filter which gives the impression that they're fully armed when they have got sod all.
Yes. I will just give a little shout out to Gul Dukat, the commander of the Cardassian task force. He's got a wonderfully expressive face. Even under all of that prosthetics, you can tell when he's angry and
he's
surprised.
He's the one who's enraged when the cat's gone missing. Yes.
Yes. Where is
he was incredible. He did look ready to open fire. It was terrifying. O'Brien is starting to come into his own, I think, even within the first episode. Because I think when I was young, I'd caught the odd episode of Deep Space Nine. I don't remember any plot. I remember that O'Brien was there quite consistently. I was therefore surprised that in The Next Generation, he doesn't have much of a presence. No. He's there for a few episodes. He gets married. His wife seems constantly angry with him. And that's about all that he does. But he steps in here and he brings all of his know-how, complains that it's Cardassian tech that he's never used before and he's having to adapt to it. And he's a technological wizard immediately. Yes. So I'm looking forward to... I've been warned that Deep Space Nine is the show about torturing the Irishman. I know that bad things are going to happen to him, and I don't know that I want to see it, and I'm going to have to.
It is interesting. I think it's one of those things where the writers' room on the show thought it was a great idea, when in reality, we like O'Brien. He is the everyman in a crew with shapeshifters and aliens. And really weird aliens, He is just a guy. I work at Starfleet, but I also have a life. I happen to know how to fix some of this stuff. And for some reason, the writers do want to put him through hell on Earth. Hell on Bajor. He will go through a lot, which is a shame, because he is probably the best audience surrogate, I would say. He is the closest, after Sisko and Bashir, to just, your baseline human Federation male. I work in space.
Who's not in charge, can't necessarily call the shots and has to cope with what's happening.
100%. But he does bring his wife. She is still angry, but she also finds some other ways to
I think she had a right to be angry in a lot of the episodes where she was irate with him, to be fair.
That doesn't change either. Yeah, she's constantly confronted with situations which are just unreasonable for anyone to deal with. And Keiko... Miles' wife, she doesn't work for Starfleet either. She's an independent researcher, and she's just like, I don't have to deal with this. I didn't sign up to be bullied by Q or pushed around by cloud creatures. This isn't my
turned into a child for a whole episode.
Oh my God, rascals! Oh, what a strange episode that was. Oh dear me! But we have such delights to show you along those lines. So yes, I did want to spend more time on all the characters, but I think we will, as they get episodes that explore them more, we will get more chance to get into each character. So that's
absolutely.
Really good. I took that line from the prophets. You value your ignorance of what is to come. I thought, that's wonderfully human. That's wonderfully Star Trek. We don't know what's going to happen.
The line that I wrote down was the one that followed that. The one that Sisko says in response, that may be the most important thing to understand about humans. It is the unknown that defines our existence. So when he says, when a bomb ball is thrown in baseball, 100 different things can happen, and that's where the excitement comes from. There would be no point in playing if we knew what the outcome was going to be.
And that's it.
And how that brings excitement and risk and the potential of losing everything.
100%. And is that not, that is, as Cisco says, humanity, but for me it is also an ethos of the show, you know. Weird stuff is going to happen on a regular basis. You've just got to roll with it, because that's Star Trek, that's Starfleet, you know. Yes, obviously we see Cisco come to terms with his grief in a way where he realises that his trauma is occupying a great part of his mind, and it's a wonderful way of exploring and negotiating kind of trauma and how it sits within us. I did love that. And then back on the station, I was quite surprised that they blew up a lot of their new set in that very dramatic battle with the Cardassians. They really blew stuff up.
I think they must have had a remit of make it clear that anything. They didn't kill off any characters. They didn't introduce us to, apart from Jennifer, who had died prior to the events of this episode. They didn't do the introduce us to a kind puppy of a character who then dies. It could have been worse, but it does feel as if they made it very high stakes. Anything can happen. The place could get blown up at any moment.
Absolutely. They've set the tone again that this is a risky place. We are in danger. We're on the frontier. We're a long way away from the rest of the fleet. I think Ducat says that you're a long way away from the Federation fleet, and he's right. Starfleet doesn't drop by every day to save the day. They're on their own there. And they don't have a Galaxy-class starship prior to the fleet to defend them. There's just them. So, yeah, they hang by a thread a lot of the time, and it's wonderfully tense.
I do, and one thing I was really impressed by, and a difference between this and Babylon 5. Babylon 5, I think every opening sequence has a montage of characters doing exciting things throughout the show. It introduces each of the actors, and it shows you them doing stuff that looks thrilling, that you're going to want to stay and watch. Deep Space Nine has got a really slow and ponderous panning view of the station from different angles. It's not the original series or the Next Generation, where the ship moves quickly from one place to another. You see that they're going to be traveling a lot. I have already covered that they stay in one place, but the opening sequence lasts a long time, and they damn well show it. They just sit there with the ship and expect the audience to stay with it, and then the show does back up that this is going to be exciting and thrilling, and they didn't have to show that in the opening. They could rely on it to stand its own ground, and I love the boldness of it. It's so different.
I love that observation. I'd never thought about that the intro sequence is like that, but it is. It's very panoramic of this very strange, non-human looking ship. The DS9 itself looks bizarre. I don't think there's any way of getting around that.
It does,
not human. There it is. Isn't it? And the set, you know, it's not Picard's bridge. It is this bizarre orange and brown and dark greens. It's so weird, and I love it. Again, you can see why it hooked me. The moment I saw all of this stuff, I was just grabbed. But yes, staying in one place, and I think ponderous is a good word, because when the writers get to grips with the fact that they can't go anywhere, they start putting in motion themes, what we would call story arcs that we're so familiar with now, but in the 90s were very strange. I know Babylon 5 did have some overarching things, you know, the various wars, Sinclair's identity, you know.
And it's very different in that it doesn't have the hard reset that the idea of the first couple of generations of Star Trek was, that you could come in at any point and fairly quickly get to grips with who is who does what, and you can watch the episode from beginning to end, and it's self-contained for the most part. I think Tasha Yar dies fairly early on just because the actress left, but otherwise there's relatively little carryover, whereas Deep Space Nine, they're going to have to have the events of one episode affect the events of the next. You can't have a wormhole open and then close and have a character come to terms with this drama and then the next episode be, well, gee gosh, isn't it nice being aboard a space station above Beijo?
And absolutely nothing ever happened here, if you ignore last week. Absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. One thing I skipped over, and I do want to go back, is your impression of the Bajoran faith. Because very soon after Sisko steps onto the station, a Bajoran priest says, you need to come to the temple. And then, you know, he is taken to meet Kaya Parker, and he's exposed to the orb, and you suddenly realise that this religion plays a massive part in Bajoran society. And I wondered, in a show like TNG, which had always said, we don't Religion is something that happens to other people.
Yes.
And it is a bit on DS9, but it clearly matters to Major Kira. You can get the feeling that religion's going to be a big part of DS9. So really keen to hear what you thought.
Definitely, and I think, and I think my perspective as someone who's new to the show is also that there's no question of the Bajoran faith being real. The orbs definitely exist. They definitely have powers that we would consider to be supernatural. Mm-hmm. There isn't going to be any back and forth about, but you can't tell whether God's there or not. Their faith is in these orbs, and they absolutely exist, and it happens. And the thing to do is to try to understand it and come to terms with that existence. So I'll be interested to see how that falls out culturally in terms of anyone who butts up against it, anyone who does try to deny or squash it down, because I don't know what's going to come with it yet. And Kayopaka seems very clearly accustomed to people taking it seriously when I think she puts her hand to Sisko's face and quickly tells him that he is the emissary. There's no kind of, this is going to be hard to hear, and you're not going to understand it yet. It's just, you're the emissary and you don't want to be here.
100%. Again, you've just put your finger on a very key trait within DS9, which is, the Bajoran faith is real. The orbs are real. The prophets, what the Bajorans call the prophets, are real. They're what we know as the beings that live in the wormhole.
I should have looked up that word or asked you for it before I started saying the unnamed aliens 100 times. Apologies for that.
But this is it. Starfleet refers to them as the wormhole aliens. The Bajorans are like, so that's it. That's the celestial temple. That's where our prophets live, our gods. And it's not that anybody tries to rationalise it. It's just now we have this uneasy reality where Starfleet thinks they're just a higher form of life. And the people on Voyager just think, they're our gods. We've known about them for longer than 5 minutes. You've just discovered this wormhole. To us, it is a spiritual place of thousands of years. And there's no attempt to rectify that or squash it down so everyone's happy. No, that contrast of belief, of understanding is always going to be there. And the cast are just going to have to deal with it.
It isn't. I'll be interested to see how the emissary thing plays out, though, because there is definitely a trope. It's usually a white man comes into a foreign place and becomes the best at the fighting or the magic or the religion. In this case, you've got the emissary, clearly an important figure. We don't know exactly what he's going to have to do, presumably finding and relocating the orbs for the Bajorans. He's come from the outside. He's come from the authority, from the Federation. One of the functions of that trope is to carry us with that person. We are entering that towards a foreign space, the new religion that we don't know anything about yet, and we enter it with him. But it is nonetheless a trope of an outsider coming in and mysteriously being the only one who can solve the problem. So I'm interested to watch how that plays out and see how much of that trope is fulfilled.
It is going to be interesting, and they try and avoid falling into a lot of those traps. No more spoilers, but they do explore it, and I think in a more mature and sensible way than other fictional titles have tried to be like, our hero, the leader of our story, is really good at this culture he's just arrived at. It's not that clear cut with Sisko being the emissary. I can definitely tell you that. But you're absolutely right. It will be very interesting to see how that comes out, and it'll be very interesting to hear what you think about it as it goes along. I've more or less come to the end of my notes, really. I think the last thing I've got is this final scene when everybody returns, the battle is resolved, Dressard has to back down, and the Enterprise turns up, and Picard and Sisko have that wonderful, almost TNG-esque wrapping up of, actually, we've seen things, we've experienced things, we're different people now, and then in what is a very Star Trek trope, Sisko's like, my resignation, I'd kind of like to undo that now if I can. And
Picard says, I didn't get around to telling the Federation about it just yet.
He does. What I did like is he does say, listen, you wanted to quit this job. We need to know we've got a man wanting to be here. We can't rely on somebody to be flaky. And Sisko's like, no, you know what? No. I've seen some shit. Right, and I am committed to this position.
How good would it have been if they'd been able to come have a conversation where Picard talks about what he went through in the Inner Light, and Sisko could tell him what he went through in his own memories. The Inner Light being the episode of The Next Generation where Picard is probed by an alien satellite, and caused to live within his mind an entire lifetime in an alien civilization. And he wakes up to the realization that the civilization is now extinct, and he's just been given an understanding of their culture through those memories. So yeah, there has been that understanding in Trek that experience, memories, what a person lives through affects them and is hugely important and very core to that universe. But it's been placed front and center here right in the first episode. But yes, those two characters don't understand each other. And I think that is where the handshake happens and the torch is actually passed on.
Yes,
and
100%.
and we go forward with Sisko more enthusiastic about leading the way.
100%. He's not moved on from his trauma, but he's found a way to recontextualize it, incorporate it. It's a step forward for this character, and that's DS9.
He's accepting of it, and it's with him in a different way now. Yeah,
100%. On the same kind of strand, but in a very flipped way, I loved the final scene with Kira and Quark, where Kira is explaining that you can run your bar, but you have to abide by Federation rules, and he's like, well, perhaps we can discuss these further. And she says, if you don't take your hand off my hip, I will break every bone in your hand. And I love her. I love her so much for that. No nonsense, cutting through the bullshit. This is what's going to happen. You do not touch me, or I will kill you, which you know I can do. I hope you enjoyed that scene as well.
Oh, I really did. Yeah, I was not impressed by Quark's I love a woman in uniform as he steps back from her. I think he's
meant to be that creep. You know he's meant to be that creep.
Rather irrepressible.
Yeah.
But yes, I'm very impressed by her. I like her a lot.
That is fantastic. I'm so glad. So obviously that is my kind of very scattered notes through the episode. I mean, if there's anything I've missed, please do jump in. Otherwise, I'm quite happy to take it on to one of our features, either Prime Directive or What the Trek.
I think I've said everything I intended to in the Prime Directive as we've gone through. The only thing I really have left, which you might contest, but within the first episode of this show, they mentioned the word subspace. I'm pretty sure they mentioned it more times than they did in The Next Generation put together. I'd heard the phrase before, but there are subspace fields. They're having problems with subspace relays. The subspace network isn't What the heck is it with subspace in this show? They seem to have used, I don't know how generous to be. Are they using subspace as quantum? Is this the thing that explains how anything works that they didn't actually want to science? Or is it a bit more, does it feel more solid than that to someone who's watched the rest of the show, Tim?
I tell you what, Kat, no, once again, you are the best co-pilot because you have put your finger right on the explanation. Subspace is indeed Star Trek's shorthand for, we just need you to take this on faith that this is a thing that is happening now. Subspace is a mystical other dimension where pretty much whatever needs to happen technologically to progress the episode takes place. Subspace is where we send messages. It's how ships move faster than light. Weird things come out of it to, make you a child or make you, 10 foot tall or green. Manic Land Dizzy there just pointing out the Heisenberg compensators, which is a lovely quantum gag. Obviously Heisenberg, a great early quantum physicist. Heisenberg compensators are devices in transporters, I believe, that are basically there to explain anything that might happen to the transporters that makes you turn into a child. Because quantum is such a wonderful shorthand for weird stuff in Star Trek. Subspace.
It's where the magic sits in science fiction.
100%. There will be a lot of subspace anomalies, I am afraid to say.
I'm looking forward to them. But I am sad that none of them, or very few of them, will be pegged on Q this time.
Pegged? I'm sorry, did you say pegged on Q?
Sorry, I'm going into my own space there. Q is not going to be blamed for as much in this one.
I'm just checking the maturity settings on the screen, though. I just don't want us to fall foul of anything.
Oh, come on. We've just said the word subspace about 5 times.
Right. You're absolutely right. Brilliant.
But yes, I think that's everything I needed to say. I'm aware that we're away next week.
We are, yes. No Trek Chat next week. But when we return, I'm quite happy to do the following Monday, which I believe will cover... Now, this is always a problem I've had. I don't know what you have as the next episode of DS9.
Oh, you're kidding me. Is this a contested issue?
I think streaming services have shown them in slightly out of order. but I believe that episode 3, because Emissaries 1 and 2 are the first 2 episodes, I believe that episode 3 is past prologue. But where I watch it on, I believe, Netflix, it shows A Man Alone, which is episode 4 as the next episode. So I want to make sure that we both watch the same episode.
Right, yeah, it is A Man Alone on the... What should I watch next?
Past prologue.
Past prologue. I'll make a note. No, watch that in the right... Thank you, that's going to be important to check. But, oh God, what is it with streaming services
I have
and
no
different
idea.
series and things being shown out of order? That's interesting.
Yeah, I just wanted to point it out because it's done it to me. I was watching episode 4 before episode 3 and just a little bit confused about what was going on. So I want to make sure that we both watch.
That's also interesting in terms of the lack of a hard reset and how time actually... yeah, we can pin this on time isn't linear. Our experience of Star Trek is not going to be a linear experience.
There was a subspace anomaly, right, and we didn't get the next episode we were expecting. Wonderful. Right. I do feel like I'm sure we could have talked an incredible amount longer on just episode 1.
Oh, gosh, yes. I could go through each of the scenes in Sisko's memories and just analyse what was in them and what it tells us about the character. And as well as his sorrow, we had his joy in there. There were moments of tremendous joy when he was remembering his wife, looking at his child, and just so much, as you say, so much expression of emotion from a Starfleet captain, which we rarely got from Jean-Luc Picard unless he was looking at his archaeology papers.
100%. Yeah, these characters are allowed to feel, to express emotion. They have fun. They get angry. They live in ways that I don't think there was a lot of freedom to do on the original series and the Next Generation.
Oh, so exciting!
It really is. So, we will have to steel ourselves. But I cannot wait, because the next episode is going to introduce a supporting character, which is, well, it will be very interesting to get your initial impressions on this supporting character when they are first introduced. And I will say no more. But those in chat know exactly what I'm talking about.
Cool. So I and anyone watching along with us, past prologue is the next episode that we're going to watch.
Prologue is the next episode we are going to watch. Episode 3, Season 1 of Deep Space Nine. It's the next one we will cover on the following Monday after next. For episode 2 of Trek Chat, yes.
Down as episode 3 if you're on Netflix.
Yes. Double check which one you've got so you know where we are. I would now just like to thank all the lovely people who have tuned in, all our viewers. Thank you so much for tuning in. I have been Tim, this has been Kat.
And particularly thanks to our 2 moderators, Manic Land Izzy and the Indoor Cat.
That would be right. Yes, they have been letting me know when my mic was too quiet and helping us with various technical issues. So we're very grateful.
And helping with background information. Thank you for that.
They will be our wiki demons scuttling off to find out the information when we can't remember. So many thanks to them for supporting us. If you enjoyed this, it will be available on Twitch to watch for the next 7 days. And we will also pop it on YouTube when it's free. Evening Tony Girl there, just saying thank you very much for the episode. Our pleasure. Hope you've enjoyed. Please do subscribe to this Twitch channel so you are notified when we go online next time. And we will aim to be online 8 PM GMT, Monday after next, which I make to be the 14th of August.
Goodness, it will be. How time flows.
Or not, as the case may be. You exist here. I love it. So, BST, thank you, Manic Land. yes, we are still in summertime. Despite the rain, it is still the summer. It will be 8 PM BST. Thank you, Katubodwa, for tuning in. Much appreciated. Thank you for watching. Thank you so much. And thank you, Kat, for agreeing to take part in this. You've been a wonderful co-pilot, and I hope we have many more fun discussions like this.
Thank you for inviting me to do this. I think our enthusiasm is going to be kept up. It's just, I can't believe this thing has been out there for like 30 years, and I'm watching it for the first time now. It's baffling. What have I been doing with all that time?
Watching other shows.
The wrong things.
You will have such a wonderful perspective on the show from somebody who's not seen it the first time. Who's seeing it now through these 21st century eyes. You're going to have such a great perspective to contrast with my grizzled, old, embittered one. It's going to be a lot of fun. And we thank all of you for following us, and we look forward to seeing you all next time. So, yes, live long and prosper. Good night.